give a special shout out to Ralph Anthony Garcia of the United Ronin Networks at YouTube. Make sure y'all go to the United Ronin Networks at YouTube. Check out his channel. Check out his series, Ralph Reads. Give it a like. Subscribe to his channel. And check out what he got to offer. Some really good stuff up there. This is Mike Mountain, and this message is approved by me. Peace.
Salute. Welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. On this edition of Ralph Reads, we proceed to lead you down memory lane with Ralphie's kids once again, and the man with the plan, Rasheen J. Brown. Now, we gonna go hit the town. Let the reading commence. Black Superman. It seems as if everybody during this golden era was trying to capitalize on any opportunity that presented itself and did not mind getting their hands dirty while doing it. New York City was turning into the OK Corral, which was dangerous for anyone not part of the underworld. Actually, no one was safe. Kinda had to have your own back, not knowing who to trust. While Brooklyn had their own problems brewing and life-changing events were going on across the bridge into the boroughs of Manhattan and the Bronx, a young black male life would make a turn for the worse and be publicly on display for the whole world to see. Larry Davis's story would be the pinnacle of a young black man associated with corrupt cops, and when his back was against the wall, he decided that instead of his life be taken, he would fight fire with fire and go toe-to-toe with the NYPD. Known throughout the neighborhood as an aspiring rapper and well-known DJ, many of Davis's peers respected him and considered him a stand-up individual. Davis was musically inclined, and sometimes during his spare time, he would dabble in the repairs of motorcycles, something he held close to his heart. It was said that Davis was a suspect in the murder of 4 alleged drug dealers in the area, in which others felt as if Davis was set up by the crooked cops he was associated with, who he was selling drugs for, and then later decided to end that partnership, which changed his life forever. In 1986, on November 19th, the NYPD took action and decided to come get Davis, who was residing at his sister's apartment in the Bronx. Already on alert and knowing he had a bullseye on his head, he took matters into his own hands and told himself he was not going out without a fight. Backed against the wall, Davis shot 6 officers that day and miraculously escaped without any bodily harm, not even a scratch. The NYPD was irate, and they vowed to get this criminal off the street, but they were up against a different kind of animal. Davis was going to fight until the end, and the police were not prepared. New York City was in a frenzy, and the streets were shut down, and a massive manhunt ensued throughout all the boroughs. The local drug dealers even took a loss. They even had to shut down their own operations until things died down. Everyone was on alert. Davis, who was loved and adored by so many, decided to get help from family and friends to hide, as well as elude the NYPD just enough to figure out his next move. The manhunt went on for 17 days, and after being held up in a family member's apartment, Davis, who had negotiations thrown his way all night, decided to surrender to the NYPD as long as he wouldn't be harmed or killed. Rumor had it that someone snitched on Davis and reported his whereabouts for the large reward money that would get Davis out of hiding. The initial plan was to try to get Davis out of New York City and further south just to start over, knowing the former police officers he had dealings with were trying to take him out because he knew too much. The lawyer who represented Davis felt that when the raid on Davis's sister's apartment ensued, the police were there not to arrest, but to murder the alleged killer of whom they claimed killed the drug dealers. The lawyer explained to the court that Davis acted in self-defense because he knew his life was in danger. In March of 1988, Davis went to trial and was later acquitted of killing the drug dealers. 8 months later, he was back in court, convicted on illegal gun possession, but acquitted of attempted murder and aggravated assault on the police officers who were out for blood. Davis became a legend in the hood. Angry and disturbed by the news, many of the NYPD showed up and discussed their opinions on the verdict of how the case went. Some of the black police officers who walked the beat in certain urban neighborhoods applauded the decision, knowing that Davis stood up to the crooked police officers that tried to take advantage of another young black male in the ghetto. Serving a 5 to 15-year gun conviction charge, Davis would soon be acquitted in a separate murder trial. But sometimes, when you're a black man in America and you defeat numerous hurdles, it's always some bullshit that later will jam you up, and your fate usually lies in the hands of the ones who are truly gunning for you. The authorities were determined to get Davis by any means necessary, and they were not going to stop until he was dead or rotting behind bars. The circumstances of being associated with a power source such as the NYPD by either being forced or maybe a sense of trust from one party to the next, caused Davis's freedom in the long run, as well as his life being taken away while serving his lengthy prison sentence. Davis was sentenced to 25 years to life, all while still maintaining his innocence and stating that the NYPD had framed him. While in prison, Davis converted to Islam and changed his name to Adam Abdul Hakim, shedding the identity that plagued his existence on earth. In 2008, a fellow inmate stabbed Davis, causing him to die in prison.
Uptown, uptown.
Growing up in the concrete jungle was no joke. Young boys and young girls were being pushed into adult situations way before they wanted to be part of that world. In school, some teachers would teach about the history of great black leaders such as Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks, to name a few. And if you wanted to learn more, you had to go to the local library and research other great leaders. We didn't have the access that we have today, but outside the school teachings, some kids had street legends that became their own idols, people they either looked up to or wanted to be like. Growing up and having to struggle and try to maintain a sense of sanity living in the hood could cause anyone to snap and lose their mind, or either learn to adapt and carve out their own lane in this busy world. The street legends became the leaders that the black youths looked up to as well as idolized during this golden era. Drug dealers, murderers, money getters, boosters, stick-up kids, just a few monikers that were stamped on some of the notorious people that walked the NYC streets. In the borough of Manhattan, the flow of money, due to the crack epidemic, brought 3 young black males to the forefront to be young money getters at an age way before their teenage years reared its head. Not to say that others were not getting money or making a name for themselves, but these guys made an impact on street folklore. AZ Faison, Rich Porter, and Alpo Martinez decided to bet on themselves and make a name by all means. AZ Faison, also known as AZ, was a young black male trying to find his way in the world, and at this young age, where he brought in his childhood friend Rich Porter, as well as giving his associate Alpo Martinez a shot to form a partnership and become bigger than anyone who seemed like competition. AZ became the Harlem go-to for the most part. His business expanded throughout the city. Not able to perform academically and having certain struggles in high school, he decided to drop out and find suitable work for himself to survive in the hood. Work in the nearby dry cleaners, AZ soon sparked a relationship with a Dominican drug distributor who had frequented the dry cleaners on several occasions. The conversation of entering a lucrative money game by dealing drugs took AZ's mind to an all-time high, even more due to the influence of watching the movie Scarface prior to the talk. AZ became one of the first main drug distributors in the NYC area around the time that the crack cocaine widespread hit the streets in the early 80s. By the tender age of 21, AZ was making almost $40,000, if not more, a week off of those drug sales. Wanting to spread the wealth and put money in the hands of those he cared about, he decided to extend his hand and bring his homeboy Rich Porter into the fold after his stint in jail. Seeing an opportunity to make money and feel indebted to a dude he met while locked up, Porter decided to introduce Alpo to AZ, and later the trio took the crack game to a much higher level than what had already been established by AZ himself. Money was flowing, cars were being purchased, females were coming out the woodwork, jewelry was in abundance, street credibility was being formed, and life seemed to be great to these young black males just wanting a piece of the American pie. All that is good also had its own downfalls, and when you are a young black male doing your thing, just remember, trouble is either around the corner or has already set foot at your door, and that would be the case for all three of these money getters. When you are on top and you hold the crown, just know that everyone is coming for you. And in the year of 1987, AZ found out the hard way. During an attempted murder on AZ's life, things seemed to change drastically. It was said that his sister's ex-boyfriend and a few associated with that ex-boyfriend waited inside AZ's apartment to rob him. At the time, 6 patrons were inside the apartment. As soon as AZ entered, he was immediately grabbed and assaulted, as well as shot 9 times, fighting for his life. 3 people got killed that night, while 3 others were seriously injured. This act of violence shifted AZ's life to change and detour away from the drug operation he had built in the 5-year span. He wanted no parts of it anymore, and the change altered the relationship he had with his business partners, Porter and Martinez. Starting over and deciding to be more of a positive influence rather than the one looked upon as destroying his and everyone else's community, Faison decided to start a mission to teach the youth on the importance of staying away from drugs and to be positive in life. In 1989, Faison formed a rap group called Mob Style, whose message was in line with conscious hip-hop. The name may have thrown people off, but the message was live and direct, and that was what Faison was trying to get out to the people, a message of hope. An album came from the group in 1991. A solo album then followed with Faison spreading his own message on a lone attempt. A documentary, as well as a book, had been issued telling Faison's life story, as well as his change from the dark underworld he escaped from. The documentary is called Game Over. The book is titled Game Over: The Rise and Transformation of a Harlem Hustler. Richard Porter, the right-hand man to AZ, was also a young black male trying to find his way in the world. Known to many as Money Rich or Rich Poe, he was an individual who people in Harlem loved and admired, although Rich was getting money and earning a reputation as someone who mid-level drug game was bringing in close to $50,000 a week. When he teamed up with Faison and Martinez, his rep grew bigger and the money started flowing like a faucet with no intention to shut off. Porter started dealing drugs at the tender age of 12 and never looked back. In 1984, Porter was sentenced to a year for drug and weapon possession. There, he met Alpo, and an alliance was formed. Known to be a very flashy individual and true money-getter, it was also said that Rich never wore the same outfit twice. Just a different breed and cut from a rare cloth. He owned several high-class vehicles and would come through the hood and show off every chance he got. Money was not a problem to this young drug dealer, and overall, it cost him and his younger brother's life mainly over greed and jealousy. On December 5th, 1989, his younger brother was kidnapped and held for ransom. Some said his uncle was behind the attack, in which Rich's brother's finger was cut off in order to extort money from Rich, knowing how close he was to his younger brother. The kidnappers sent the cut-off finger to the home where Rich and his family resided and demanded $500,000 for the return of the brother, eventually being killed later and never receiving a dime that was demanded. Rich loved his brother and was doing his best to try and get the money, and in return went to Faison for help and received it just as friends do, helping each other in a dire need. Meeting up with Alpo due to the fact that Faison was heading out of the drug game but still supplying Rich with product to gain a monetary transaction in order to pay the ransom. It led to Alpo betraying Rich, killing him. Back in January 3rd, 1990, the body of Porter was found near Orchard Beach in the Bronx. His body riddled with bullets. Holes in the head and chest appeared visible to the human eye. Alpo was later caught and charged as well as convicted for his business associate's murder. Rich's younger brother's body was found on January 28, 1990, approximately a mile from where his older brother's body was found. Albert Geddes Martinez, also known as Alpo, was the third member of this famous trio, a fire starter and a true hustler. Coming from a Hispanic background and being fluent in Spanish helped open many doors for Alpo. By dealing with Dominicans or Latino drug connections was an advantage, not letting the suppliers know that he understood if they were either trying to beat him during drug deals or where they kept their stash benefited Alpo in every possible way. Understanding the dialect, Alpo would come back to the stash house and take everything that was not nailed down. And one thing for sure, he was not shy about his gun game. Rising to the highest level possible during the drug era, he expanded his business affairs outside of New York City and ended up in Washington, D.C., where he got acquainted with some heavy high rollers, also making power moves and bringing in more money than the average drug dealers at the time. A resident of Spanish Harlem, which is on the east side, located in Manhattan, Alpo was raised by a single mother, trying to not just raise him, but other siblings for that matter. Alpo attended 2 different high schools, Automotive Mechanical and Julia Richmond High School, until his decision to drop out after his sophomore year. Already selling drugs at the age of 13, things really took off once he was introduced to AZ. Once connected with a large quantity of drugs and becoming close with AZ and Porter, Alpo easily shot up the ladder and became a force to be reckoned with. A zero-tolerance individual, Alpo was not to be taken lightly, and many people knew this about him. A hot temper led to a lot of gunplay during his reign in these New York streets. Money was flowing for these young dealers, and Alpo decided to expand on his own and took his wit and smarts to Washington, D.C., where he opened up shop and got entangled with another no-nonsense individual by the name of William Silk Perry, who would later become Alpo's bodyguard due to all the enemies he had. He had made due to kill or be killed. Alpo stated after Rich's death that he felt his fellow associate was overcharging him on drug deals, and by being upset at this action, Alpo decided to get help from another associate, where they lured Porter into a vehicle where they both shot and killed him. Money, drugs, jealousy, envy, hatred, wanting to be on top of all that played a factor in Porter losing his life that day. In 1991, in the month of November, Alpo was arrested outside of New York City. While selling drugs in D.C., he was facing numerous charges from the drug dealings and murders, and the punishment was either the death penalty or life imprisonment. Alpo wasn't trying to choose neither, and decided to cooperate with the United States government, where his business associates all received lengthy life prison sentences, where in return, Alpo was hit with 35 years. He was released in 2015. Depicting this real-life event, the movie Paid in Full explains the relationship that this trio embarked on and showed how fast money and trying to make a name in this cold world can lead to destruction. Everyone wants the fame and the exposure, and at the height of the crack epidemic, money being the root on why youngsters, as well as older people, do things out of the norm seem to be very confusing to those not put into these rough living situations. But coming from the hood, we take whatever we are given and we make a way regardless of the end result. Some feel, "At least I tried," rather than not try at all. Not to shed light on the timeline of New York City's most notorious criminals during this time, but just to introduce the harsh realities of seeing how the streets don't love anyone, and even the closest person can come for your crown with intention of knocking you off of your throne in order to be on top. Facts cannot be disputed, and in reading this book explains how everything is tied together. In life, changes are always happening, such as neighborhoods as well as businesses, and for the most part, people. As a human being, we change every second of the day, and if someone tells you different, they are lost. Either you continue your ways, which are reckless and may lead you down a path of hurt and pain, or you take a second to reflect on your life and what results you want for self, and you make that decision to change for the best and watch the outcome. Hope is what the older relatives would pray for during a time when things were seemingly spiraling out of control. That is all black people wanted, a sense of belonging and being appreciated for the greatness that comes from us as a people. The younger generation coming up the late 80s and early 90s found hope through the drug game or joining a gang where their mentality embraced a sense of family and togetherness. A reputation amongst peers is more valuable than money at times. Having a rep, and that rep being respected across the board, makes anyone feel invincible. But it also brings many invites that can lead to uncertain harm or even death. But when you are riding your own wave, the wipeout that is brewing is far out of reach in the target's mind. In the Bronx, a young black youth named Peter Rollick from the Soundview Projects decided to create his own buzz by forming the gang known as SMM. Sex, Money, Murder took the drug game to the highest level, created one of the largest Bloods gangs to hit the East Coast. Nicknamed Pistol Pete from his gunplay on certain rivals, Rollick made sure he was well respected as well as feared. His operation grew with the ability to launder money from the drug operations he was running daily. New York City, being the home front, soon grew, and the operations began to expand outside of the tri-state area. A businessman who controlled the drug market was also a known killer who instead gave orders to execute the foes or would pull the trigger himself. Once caught and incarcerated, Rollick continued to order hits on the competition that was standing in the way of his business by causing harm and being a menace to society. At the age of 25, Rollick accepted a plea deal of life behind bars to escape the death penalty. His rep remained intact even while being locked away. His influence reached not only the 5 boroughs, but exceeded all along the East Coast and beyond. It has been said that his word alone could get anyone murdered. And that was like music to Rollick's ears, knowing people were willing to do just about anything for him. A true street legend to many, but a hardened criminal to the NYPD who vowed to put him away for life for his destructive ways. While locked in Rikers Island, Rollick decided to join the infamous Bloods gang. Being respected in the street, he didn't have to get jumped in, and it was given his own set, solely on his reputation alone. Rollick was a natural-born leader, and he showed those survival skills on the island, and many took notice of his leadership and animal instincts while being locked up. To pay his own lawyer fees, he continued to run his operation as if he were still running rampant on the NYC streets that birthed the monster he became. Intelligence is something that many are born with, while others are naive to the ways of the world. People go to school and begin to embrace the concept of reading and writing, knowing that it is a great way of communicating with others. Well, that is if you want to make it in this brutal world, for one. Some take the other path and either try to fake their way through, not knowing eventually it too shall backfire. Coming up during a time when things seemingly were out of control and some parents were strung out on drugs and living a hellish life, children were learning from what they witnessed in the streets. This is what most considered the school of hard knocks, basically stating that those did not attend school and followed the right rules in life unfortunately had to learn from the streets. And with those lessons came major hardships. Everybody in life cannot have the same occupation. This is what makes everyone special. But with a life of crime, many took the chance at whatever came their way, whether it was robbing, killings, drug dealing, whatever, just to make it. Many say that trouble is easy to get into, but hard to get out of, which is a true statement. We are born as individuals, and at birth we are given a name. But as we grow, it is like we need our name to mean more than just what we were given. When we arrived at this world, growing up and residing in the hood, it was nothing to hear a "yo" such and such name ringing bells, meaning whoever was being mentioned during that conversation was a real dangerous person, and either you rocked with that person or you stayed the hell away. Just like the TV series titled The Wire, which portrayed the harsh living conditions of growing up in Baltimore, there was a character portrayed by the likes of Jamie Ortiz, who in fact hails from Brooklyn, and during the series he was known as Marlo, a no-nonsense drug dealer who at all costs tried his best to protect what was his as well as his name. During one of the episodes, Marlo made a statement while being locked up with his comrades, and while discussing their woes, Marlo, speaking to 2 members of his team, influenced about the opposition throwing dirt on his name, and maybe other members of the crew snitching, put Marlo in a bad headspace. While feeling betrayed and slander being thrown on his name, vengeance starts to seep through his mind. In order for the head to be able to move wisely during this period, Marlo's right-hand man decided to withhold information that could have caused a major street war. Even though this is fiction, this scene hit home to many true-life gangsters who could relate to what Marlo was stating. When the foes or opposition decides to get at you and call you out in the streets, pride jumps in, and the results ain't always good. Marlo gets agitated and decides that when they are sprung from the cell they are in, orders are given to let any and everybody know that he runs from no one, and he quotes, My name is my name, which is as important as that person's next breath he takes. Staying on the dark side of this track, we stay in the borough of the Bronx and enter the world of George Rivera, a hood legend who became a multi-millionaire during the height of the 90s turbulent drug epidemic. A young Latino, barely touching teen status, took on the world and basically became a one-man entrepreneur service, and he enjoyed the fruits of his labor. Dubbed the James Bond of the drug game, George loved the finer things in life, and he flaunted his toys as well as his money. It was said during his short run in the game, $15 million was made in the 2-year span. George was the wealthiest drug dealer from NYC, as well as the youngest to get hit with the kingpin status once he was apprehended by the law. A pure businessman who ran his operation like a Fortune 500 business, George played no games, even though he was well respected in the streets. He was everything wrapped up in one: charismatic, leader, smart, witty, gangster, gentleman, CEO, brutal, and by having all of these qualities helped him leap to the highest of heights during a time when everyone else was trying to find their way. George could have taken all the special qualities and ran a boardroom in any city and made a huge profit, but he chose to make his imprint on the busy streets of the Bronx. Crack and cocaine already had burst onto the scene, but instead of following that lane, George tried his hand in the heroin department. The end results were very lucrative for him and anyone associated with him. He flooded the streets of Manhattan as well as the Bronx, and his product was of a high quality. Competition could not compete with him. Coming into his 20s, it was said that his heroin operation was bringing in $9 million a year, and George was becoming more powerful as his name began to grow. Even being a suave individual and running a very profitable business, George had to get his hands dirty with many homicides and shootouts occurred during his reign. Incentives and lavish gifts were rewarded to certain workers who performed well in the organization, but disloyal behavior or coming up short would bring out a side of George that nobody wanted to see. George took his drug empire very seriously as well as his reputation, so any flaws or miscues were a definite no for anyone who brought problems to the camp. George would have secret compartments in the vehicles he owned and would take ideas from many James Bond movies. Loaded guns would be present at the push of a button, or lights could blind anyone following him. Money and guns were hidden in the fleet of vehicles he owned, and he did not mind the expense he had to dish out for these tricked-out foreign vehicles. He purchased Lamborghinis, Porsches, Bentleys, BMWs, Mercedes-Benzes, and Ferraris, to name a few, and did not worry about the price since the money was flowing. He also owned commercial real estate as well as a mansion in his hometown of Puerto Rico. A stash house was acquired on the Upper East Side just to stash money and keep his fleet of expensive cars intact so that he could continue living like a king. George was a very persistent individual, and he maintained order, made sure everything was how he wanted and no shortcuts were given. Being flashy and flamboyant with the money earned and having your name bring attention to the law seems to be all gangsters' downfall. And that held true for George, earning him a prison sentence of life behind bars with no chance of parole. But his legendary street status will remain alive forever. Living during this era, there were never any signs of promise or hope for any Latino or black faces like mine. So in return, I have decided to write what was present in these harsh times. I wish I could tell you growing up in these neighborhoods that greatness was spilling out in abundance, but that would be false. Different people just trying to make it to the next day and being able to provide what they had. The government was issuing food for those that could not afford it, as if we needed a handout. We needed more, but we made do with what was given. Canned pork and beans and peanut butter. Let us not forget about the canned milk where you had to add water. Every item was labeled in the black and white container. The infamous government cheese was a favorite amongst some black households, which came in the brown box, and it was hard as hell to slice. Thinking back on those fond memories makes me, as well as others, appreciate how resourceful black people were when we are given the scraps of the world, and we turned hardship into beauty. Imagine being on a line as if you were waiting for a club to let you in, only to receive no frills food, and your friends or classmates that live in the neighborhood see you. Total embarrassment seems to take over. No frills for the hood. Food stamps debuted in the late 30s due to many going hungry and trying to survive from the Great Depression, as well as neighboring farmers taking the majority of the nation's hit at this horrible time. The economy crashing to a halt sent the United States into a frenzy, and so the Department of Agriculture stepped in to save the people. The government interference caused an outcry from many business owners stating that this new act that was issued would and was ruining their profits in the marketplace. The deal was to purchase an abundance of food and initially distribute it to those that were needy or who could not afford to spend much for food. Basically, little to nothing but close to being given free food. The experimental program would eventually feed over 20 million American citizens until it was put to an end in 1943, only to be reborn and issued back in effect by the president at that time, John F. Kennedy. It was stated in 1964 at a signing ceremony when the president at that time, Lyndon B. Johnson, said the food stamp plan was one of the most valuable weapons on poverty. During the late 70s and transitioning into the 80s, the food stamps were issued in the booklet format, and the paper-thin coupons had to be ripped from the booklet in order to purchase certain food that was allowed to be purchased in certain establishments. To reduce fraudulent acts from people abusing the program, the government began to issue electronic cards with the monetary amount that could be used for the household. Living during hard times brings many thoughts to someone trying to make it in this cold world, and many recipients were selling their stamps in return for cash instead of purchasing food in which it was intended for. In 2008, the paper food stamps were banished and a new program named SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, took effect. Having no understanding of what was going on, or even knowing the history of many conditions while growing up in the hood, leads to chaos or embarrassment from your neighbors or even your peers. Imagine not being able to eat or having no means of income to provide for the hungry individuals you see day in and day out. That was the outcome for many of the RALPHIE'S kids that roamed the streets. Many may deny the fact, but once again, many families were struggling just to make it to the next day. Imagine being sent to the store with food stamps and your friends come in, fear and embarrassment sinks in. But when you are younger and don't understand the importance of eating and surviving, you fall victim to the unknown and you lose in the process. I hear adults nowadays wish they had food stamps now. Times have drastically changed since my upbringing. The same adults who were children teasing those that had the stamps are faced with the same thing they frowned upon. I wish I could paint the reader a beautiful picture with the words that are coming across these pages, but I would be lying as well as being an injustice to you. New York City was no joke in the golden era, and it was a dog-eat-dog mentality to most. Blacks and Latinos have learned to survive from the very beginning while also dealing with the horrific abuse thrown their way. In life, you make do with what you have, and when you get tired of just surviving and being fed scraps, you find a way to gain more by any means necessary. Street kings who ruled Queens, New York. Let us take a ride to South Jamaica, Queens, and into the world of the infamous Supreme Team. What started in 1981 and continued well into 1999, the team run by Kenneth Supreme McGriff was a crew that instilled fear into many, all the while controlling the drug market in Queens. Founded by Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, the team took their operation to new heights and engaged in many illegal activities such as drug trafficking, armed robberies, murder, and money laundering. What started out as a group of teens who were members of the 5% Nation quickly left the nation and formed their own crime syndicate. McGriff running the show and having his nephew second in command to the drug dealing operation took the team to an excessive plateau, exceeding a money amount of almost $200,000 a day in profits. McGriff, being a natural-born leader and controlling the business, made him well respected and feared in the streets. Having a major target on his back due to how the team operated at this time soon got McGriff on the NYPD radar, in which later he was arrested and sent to prison for 10 years, being locked away but still running the show behind bars. His nephew Gerald Prince Miller took over the reins and ruled with a much more iron fist. He had to prove himself, and he did with force. A zero-tolerance order came into effect, and Prince made sure rivals and anybody else that was a threat was taken care of or put out of the picture, especially if the Supreme Team was losing money. It was stated that 8 murders were ordered while McGriff was locked away and Prince was running the show. The team was well organized, and they communicated by using the 5% Supreme Alphabet and Supreme Mathematics just to be a step ahead of the law enforcers as well as the opposition. They were ahead of their time, and to outsmart anyone trying to take down their operation, they took drastic measures in order to make sure nothing jeopardized what was going on in their camp. In every operation that is operating at an all-time high and mainly pulling in an abundance of money, the eyes of the law tend to take notice, and everybody wants to take a crack at bringing you down. Being in power and able to pay off crooked cops or any law officials have their perks, but believe that you will take major losses in the process. Price would eventually get caught and apprehended, causing the state to move in on the Supreme Team operation, hitting numerous stash houses and confiscated guns, money, incriminating photographs, documents, drugs, and other items that will help build a strong case against them. Having this information, McGriff ordered that the operation be shut down until further notice, just to let the heat die down. Once released from prison, Prince got back into the groove and helped get the Supreme Team back on track, mainly running the show as if he had never left. Upping up security and basically running the operation to a science. Prince had to be careful, knowing that the law that once locked him away still had eyes on him and everyone associated with him. Violence and murders continued under McGriff and Prince's leadership, and in 2007, McGriff was convicted of murder for hire, in which he acquired charges of paying someone to murder 2 individuals. 5 days of deliberating the case, a jury found McGriff guilty of murder as well as drug trafficking, and McGriff was sentenced to life in prison. McGriff and his nephew were not the only ones in Queens making noise, and that is when the term real, recognize real came into play. There were other crews and individuals making a name for themselves in this drug game, but there was a guy by the name of Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols who took it to a much higher level. Anyone in his way would feel the wrath as well. Nichols, born in Birmingham, Alabama, and at an early age moved to NYC and resided in Queens, New York, took on the nickname Fat Cat due to his huge head and football player stature. Jumping into the drug game during the 80s, Nichols saw an opportunity and dove right in with the help of employing close family members to help build his empire. In a game so cutthroat, competition as well as disloyal associates get dealt with in the harshest way in the streets. It has been said that Nichols was responsible for murdering his former parole officer as well as a female he once dated. Moving to NYC at the age of 10, Nichols found himself in an unknown area and dealing with being with his mother and her now 3rd husband. No sign of a role model in sight and no care in the world, the streets began to raise him. Not interested in the school system, dropping out of 9th grade and running right into the arms of crime would determine the outcome of this young black kid's life forever. The streets don't love anyone, and when you have no guidance, you believe that the money, women, and people loving you are really what you need to stay on top. But everything comes to a halt when you ride that high. Joining a gang while still an adolescent, Nichols and another young individual committed 2 robberies, and later Nichols was apprehended and convicted of the crime, which he was sentenced to 18 years. But that sentence was cut due to Nichols only serving 2.5 years, being released in 1980. When you are making noise in the streets, you have to understand, not just your enemies or your business associates are watching, but also other people seeing the potential in you. Always someone higher up willing to take a chance to use you either for their gain or for the both of y'all to make it. Nichols was able to jump into the game by being connected to the mafia. During the height of the drug boom that began to spread like a bad virus, the mafia was controlling most of the drug trade on the East Coast, and by being in business with them, Nichols found himself in the best possible position. Trust is a major part when you get into a business where the outcome is either jail or death, and nothing good comes from it but the material things and the huge abundance of cash that was considered dirty to most and trouble for others. Employing his mother and his 2 sisters were the first steps that Nichols took in building his team. He also brought in a friend whom he met while incarcerated by the name of Howard Pappy Mason, who would be an important figure in the business as well as a piece that would also bring major heat and destruction to the empire that was being built. Moving drugs and being on top, Nichols had to have a headquarters to keep money, guns, drugs, and anything else he had to have hidden, so he decided to run his business out of a deli. Big Mac's Deli to be exact, which he and his wife took over from his wife's father. Remember, everybody is watching when you make major moves in the hood, and that leads to people telling, and in this case, Big Mac's Deli was raided in 1985, and the NYPD was able to obtain $180,000 in cash, heroin, marijuana, cocaine, as well as an arsenal of different weapons. Nichols was able to bail out on all the charges he was facing, and he felt as if he was in the clear until his then parole officer later violated him and locked him up after bailing out on the previous encounter. Enraged and not wanting to go back to jail, a scheme of sending his parole officer a message was soon put into place, and Nichols ordered some member of his crew to go pay the parole officer a visit, in which things didn't go according to plan, and the end result was murder, in which Brian Rooney was gunned down. Nichols was later charged with second-degree murder for the death of the parole officer, even though he didn't pull the trigger, and later, at his trial, Nichols stated that his intentions was never to kill anyone, but rather rough him up and send him a message. While locked away, business continued as if he was still on the streets of New York. Hits were still being ordered behind the bars that locked Nichols, and anyone that violated Nichols or anyone on his team would be dealt with in payment of death. Two individuals met their own fate when they decided to rob Nichols' then girlfriend. One of Nichols' baby mothers decided to steal money from him, which probably was the wrong thing to do, but stealing the money and spending it on another person put Nichols in the bad state, and she had to pay the consequences for her actions. Nichols' crew took it upon themselves with orders from him to pay the then girlfriend a visit, and when they caught up with her, she was with her child as well as her friend. Not knowing that her life was in danger, bullets began to ring out instantly, killing Nichols' former girlfriend and wounding the friend who actually survived the shooting. The child that the former girlfriend and Nichols shared was dropped off in the yard of his maternal grandmother's home, so he wasn't hurt. It seemed as if bad luck was soon coming Nichols' way. A case of events transpired that kept Nichols on the edge. Nichols' wife was kidnapped during the year of 1987 and held for ransom, which was later paid, and his wife was released. The kidnappers were later apprehended. The next event that occurred was Nichols' mother's house being firebombed. His mother and stepfather were able to escape, but Nichols' half-sister became a casualty due to the fire. In 1988, Nichols had been convicted on drug and weapon charges, sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. While locked behind bars, it was said that his business partner, Pappy Mason, also locked behind bars, took it upon himself to murder an NYPD police officer that was staking out and trying to protect a citizen who had called, reporting illegal activity on the street he lived on. This brought major heat on Nichols, and his crew soon came to a sudden crash. Pappy Mason was sentenced to life in prison in 1994, as well as being charged with Edward Burns' death, the NYPD officer who sat in his marked patrol car and was killed in the line of duty. To help his sister and his mother get lighter prison sentences, Nichols was said to have cooperated, as well as telling on Pappy Mason, a partner he was causing havoc in the streets with. Pressure bust pipes is a universal saying that has made its way out of many mouths over a course of time, mainly meaning when your back is against the wall, either you're going to fold or come out on top. In the cold world, trying to survive one day at a time can lead to so many changes in one's life. Some people are addicted to the life of crime, yet they soon forget the harsh backlash that they face once it comes to a screeching halt. Once you bring problems into your life, as well as your immediate circle, the consequences affect everyone around you, and that is why it is best to do your dirty by yourself. Fast money has always seemed like the right solution to the young Black and Latino children growing up in the poverty-stricken neighborhoods during a time when life could have been like living in hell. The children of the ghetto have learned to adapt to their surroundings as well as the circumstances that have been dished out since birth. As much as I hate the term, I'm a product of my environment. This has been a truthful matter for most. It's like basically if you're put in a bad situation, mentally you become stuck, not knowing if you push forward in life, you can overcome many obstacles that at one time seemed to cloud your judgment. But now you have faced them head on and defeated the odds. As we leave the borough of Queens, we shortly re-enter the infamous borough of Brooklyn, a borough with an extraordinarily rich history like no other, never taking away from the other boroughs of New York City. Just a little reminder to you, the reader. Brooklyn coming for everything. Brooklyn. What more can I say than that one word alone? It is a sense of pride when anyone asks, "Where you from?" And the reply is Brooklyn rather than New York City. The culture itself is self-explanatory and the history is beyond words. The borough has produced some of the good, the bad, and the ugly in its time. Being young in the hood, some kids wanted to be like their favorite basketball player, someone you probably only saw on television, or if you were lucky enough to get someone to take you to Madison Square Garden to catch a game. Many were not fortunate to attend those games, so the neighborhood gangsters and boosters became the ideal role models without even knowing the effect they had on the youth. You basically cannot knock how these young children were intrigued by what they saw on an everyday basis. It was like going to school and learning the ropes of the street. And for most, graduation was either going to prison, which was glorified in the streets as becoming a man and being labeled real among your peers. One of Brooklyn's infamous crime figures during a time when New York was spiraling out of control was a guy by the name of Walter King Tut Johnson, a Brooklynite to the fullest, hailing from Cypress Hills. Growing up in a Jehovah's Witness household, Tut soon gravitated to the mean streets at an early age, 16 years old. It was said that Johnson was apprehended one time by NYPD officers when he was younger on robbery suspicion. Upon arriving to obtain her son, the officer asked Johnson's mother if he had any aliases. She replied, "Tut." The officer decided to add King Tut to the police log, and the rest was history. During his rise of crime, he managed to form an organization labeled the Black Mafia, in which he got together a group of youngsters coming out of Brooklyn, and their intended targets were drug dealers. Also running with the crew was Haitian Jack, another infamous Brooklynite that caused havoc during a turbulent time in NYC. Johnson was making a name for himself and his crew as well, inspiring other youths to follow him. Once you start making noise on the streets, everyone is watching, and sometimes it's for the wrong reasons. In 1982, Johnson reportedly robbed many worshippers at gunpoint in the same place that his mother worshipped at, a Kingdom Hall in East New York. After getting away with that crime for the time being, Johnson went on a robbery spree with some of his comrades. 4 months after the robbery at the Kingdom Hall, Johnson and 4 associates decided to rob 12 passengers at gunpoint on a city bus traveling from Queens to Brooklyn. The spree ended during the following year. In 1983, robbery charges rained down on Johnson like a bad hail shower, as well as being charged for the Kingdom Hall holdup that occurred in 1982. In 1993, Johnson was also charged with a shooting that took place in the Brooklyn barber shop that involved NYPD officers being shot during the melee. What was supposed to be an easy robbery holdup turned into a shootout between off-duty police officers, Johnson and his associates. One of the officers who was shot sustained partial paralysis in which his hip was shattered. Johnson was acquitted of attempted murder but charged with robbery, for which he served a year in prison. In 1994, during the month of November, Tupac Shakur had been invited to the Quad recording studio in Manhattan to record a song with a rapper by the name of Little Sean. Being invited by James Jimmy Henchman Rosemond, an individual heavy in the streets and who had ties to Haitian Jack as well as King Tut, left no suspicion to the event that would lead to what occurred to Tupac. Arriving at the studio, Tupac was greeted by 3 gunmen as he and his crew exited the elevator, sustaining 5 gunshots as well as being relieved of his jewelry. One of Tupac's associates was shot twice in the abdomen, Randy Stretch Walker. Law enforcement took it upon themselves to add Johnson as a person of interest in the case. Investigators, according to their reports, stated that a confidential informant who had connections with Johnson informed them that Johnson said he shot Shakur to discipline him. The shooting caused a hip-hop war between the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac, mainly because, upon arriving at the studio, Tupac was greeted by Little C's, Big E's protege. With people in your ear telling you one thing or another can lead to confusion, and in return, Tupac thought he was set up. During that time, many accusations have surfaced, and most reports have come out that Biggie was not involved with the robbery or setup, and some have even said that Tupac also knew the truth. Drama sells records, but in return, lives were lost. Johnson was the first New York City resident to be sentenced to the 3-strike rule, implementing that he would have to serve a life sentence in prison for the chaos he committed during his reign. He was given a life term without the possibility of parole, enforced by the federal bill that was issued in 1994 for 3-time felony offenders. King Tut made a name for himself. The target was placed on his back by the government, who made sure they would take him down at all costs. Yeah, his name still rings bells throughout the hood, but his freedom is gone in the end. But normally in the hood, the youth usually continues the repeated cycle of either dying by either a corrupt police officer or by the hands of someone that resembles themselves, and maybe, if they are somewhat fortunate, they may end up locked away with hopes of being free one day, and hopefully changing their bad habits. Fort Greene, not too far from downtown Brooklyn. There, we are introduced to an individual by the name of Kelvin Darnell Martin, also known to many as 50 Cent. That moniker was later taken by the hip-hop rapper whose name is Curtis Jackson from Queens, New York. In 1964, Martin was born in the borough of the Bronx, and his grandmother took it upon herself to raise her grandson. Martin would find his way to Brooklyn, where he took up residency and later would get caught up in the robbery game. Martin's alias came into effect mainly because it was said that he will rob anyone, no matter what you had in your possession, regardless of any amount that was being relieved of that potential victim. Another hood tale is that Martin came upon a dice game with 50 cents to his name, and in the end walked away with a total amount of $500, in which the legend will be born. While residing in Brooklyn and causing as much havoc as he could, Martin spent most of his youth residing on Rikers Island due to his illegal activities. Even though he was just 5'2" and he weighed in at approximately 120 pounds, he was still a force to reckon with. In the streets, you must know the consequences that come with your moves, as well as know your opponents and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Martin was moving around recklessly, and in 1987, he met his demise on the staircase of his girlfriend's project building hallway, in which he was shot. He was taken to Kings County Hospital, and 4 days later, he died. The shooter was later apprehended and charged with the murder of Martin. The passages that are being read by you are in no shape or form to glorify the individual's behavior, but shed light on the circumstances that were dealt their way. Yes, as a youth, we are taught the well-being of what is right and what is wrong, and we see the beauty in the bad judgment, but not knowing or looking toward the end results. Latinos and blacks have learned to survive at all costs, and with everything thrown their way, they still manage to stand. It's a sense of being accepted, even though we know the target has remained on us for years upon years. But if we can just properly make a name for ourselves, then maybe, just maybe, life will seem much easier. So much has plagued the black and Latino neighborhoods throughout the United States, and it has felt like a curse, or maybe even a destruction plan, has been for the demise of these races. Upon the drugs entering the poverty-stricken neighborhoods, the residents had to deal with a much more serious epidemic that took lives in its path. The emergence of the virus labeled HIV took a strong grip of many of these diverse communities and went through like a wild tornado and wiped out many lives. HIV is a human immunodeficiency virus that attacks the human body that helps fight off infections, which makes that person more vulnerable to other infections or diseases. The spread of the virus occurs when bodily fluids are passed from a person infected with the virus, mostly between sexual partners or sharing needles during drug activity. It has been said that HIV cannot be cured and it stays in the human body for life. But with the proper medications, many can live a long life, and while taking the proper and prescribed medication, others won't be in harm's way of getting the virus passed through any sexual activity. The virus reared its ugly head in 1981 and has been labeled one of the United States' deadliest epidemics ever to be reported. AIDS is considered the very last stage of the HIV virus, mainly when the HIV virus has done the majority of the damage to the body, and the immune system is almost in complete ruins. Yeah, that's what the fuck I'm talking about, you know what I'm saying? Fuck yeah. Salute. Salute. Wow. Couldn't let me get started, huh? You just couldn't let me get started. Folks, I just turned on this microphone. I'm not trying to hear, and I said this before, I ain't trying to hear the MTA ain't making no money. Off with that bullshit. It was said that Davis was a suspect in the murder of 4 alleged drug dealers in the area. That train right now can fuck the fuck off. Damn train. Damn it. Damn it, especially while I'm in the fever of doing it. Well, that's what I get for not doing this after 2 o'clock in the morning like I meant to. But I figured, hey, maybe I knock some of this out. And I'm gonna knock it out. 'Cause mama said knock you out. Right? That made money. And look at this next train passing by. So between that cop and between this train, there are people right now really hating. I know. I'm stupid. The trio took the crack game to a much higher level than what... I know those trains are going to a much higher level. And that would be the case for all three of these money... Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Who instead gave orders to execute the foes would pull the... to execute the foe. Bums of anarchy never stop. While locked on the island. This is getting so annoying with these damn loud ass trains. Jesus. George would have secret compartments in the vehicles he owned and would take ideas from many James Bond movies in which loaded gun... If only I had a loaded gun, I'd probably be busting off at that very train passing by right the fuck now. Huh? Ish, man. Another, wow. You see what I'm saying, yo? It's no wonder people act bogged out around here because these trains, as often and as frequent as they pass by, god damn it, it has got to do something to the cranial. It's too much. It's too much. It's just too much. I'm telling you. I'm guaranteeing you. It's too fucking much. I have decided to write what was present in these harsh times. Nothing will ever be as harsh as a goddamn motherfucking sucking train passing by in full force. Bro, ain't it past 2 o'clock in the morning? Wow, bro. I have decided to write what was present in these harsh times. That's another train too, right? Bro, in the last 3 minutes, and you know I ain't kidding, that was yet another train passing by. Long live the railroad, damn it. Yo, can I finish this fish? Fish. Fish. Can I finish this fish? Fish. Man. Fish. For them, bro. Whew. That felt good. But we made do with what was given. Canned pork and... And we turned hardship. And we turned hard... Fuck you with your beep. What the What the is that? Can you off? What is this? Every time I try to attempt to use this microphone, I gotta hear some dumb ish outside. Why? Bro, I need to move to the country, bro. Remember. There goes those goddamn sirens. even though he was just 5'2" and he weighed in at approximately 120 pounds. Vroom. Vroom on these, I'm telling you, they're huge enough. Whatever you do, don't fall off that bike. And we see the beauty in the bad judgment. Yo, how many is you gonna be out here at 3 o'clock? Actually, 4:15 in the morning. I'll shut up now. Bahala panties, a magnetizing manly musk, hinted with a splash of light.